Hello, YouTube land. This is Brenton Son coming to you from Lexington, Kentucky, the Bluegrass State. Recently, we've had Q come back on. He goes by Q from the Mississippi area, and we've been getting quite a few stories that are really good, fascinating stories from the Mississippi area, and also Louisiana with the Diane stories and stuff that I've had on here. And anyway, it seems like a lot of interesting activity going on in that part of the United States. And also, I think it's from near where Coombo and Bear and those guys live. And they talk about having all kinds of encounters. So anyway, this fellow Tracy from southern Mississippi near the Louisiana area sent an interesting story, and we're going to talk with him today about his encounter that he had that is quite fascinating. Anyway, we're just going to go straight to him. Hello, Tracy. How you doing today?
I'm good, Brenton. How are you?
Just fine, man. I really appreciate you coming on to tell this. After I read your story that you sent by email, I thought, wow, I had heard a really similar story to yours, and you had mentioned that in the email, and so I thought, wow, man, that is so cool that this guy had almost a exact kind of encounter as the one I had just happened to hear. And you must have watched that same show, and I'm not sure what show it was now, but I think you sent me the email before I'd heard that show, and then I heard, when I heard that show, I was kind of wondered if it was you, so I had to go back and check. But if you would, Tracy, kind of give us an idea of what the landscape and flora and fauna is like around where you live, and kind of give us a description of the setting, and then if you would just share your encounter and leave no detail out that you can think of.
Well, I live in a heavily wooded area, southern Mississippi. I can sit on my front porch and look at Louisiana. But at the time I was working, I'm no longer working now, but a guy that lives next door to me, he and I commuted to work every morning, and we'd go in at like 6 o'clock. When I'd get up early, and I'd walk into my driveway, which was probably 600 or 700 feet from my home, and I'd let him pick me up as he'd come by. And every morning at 4:30, I'd walk into my driveway. Well, this particular morning, as I was walking to my driveway, I got about halfway down my driveway, and all of a sudden, something in the edge of the woods, it grunted, and it kind of roared at me, and it sounded like a big lion, and it stunned me. I just froze in my tracks, and I couldn't move. And the hair on my neck stood up, and I was like, what in the hell was that, And I kept trying to focus to see where it was coming, where it came from, but it was still dark, and I couldn't see, but I knew it was close, because when it did that, made that noise, I felt it. And I stood there probably about 5 seconds trying to see what the world it was. I thought about running. I said, no, if I run, this thing may come after me and eat me or something, because that's the first thing that I thought of was a lion, because it sounded like a big lion. All of a sudden, I heard this little tree break, and this thing took off running. And I could hear it, I could feel its feet hitting the ground. It was probably about 50 feet from me, because that's how close I was to the edge of the woods. And this thing took off running. It got taken off some vines, and I could hear the vines stretching in the trees, and it broke a couple of vines. And I was like, good Lord, what in the world was that, And it kind of rattled me pretty bad. But I didn't come back to the house. I could tell it had ran away from me, so I continued to walk down in my driveway, and my ride come and picked me up, and I told the guy that was with me, I said, man, I just had the hell scared out of me. I said, I've been in those woods all my life, and I've never heard anything like that, what I just heard. And I tried to explain to him what it was, and he kind of laughed, and I told the guys at work when I got there, and they kind of laughed. They thought I was, just full of it. But I didn't think much about it, and I was home one Sunday night, and I was watching that TV show, Finding Bigfoot. And there was a guy at one of the town hall meetings stood up, and he gave his experience. But this guy actually saw the Bigfoot, and it was almost identical to what I experienced, except I couldn't see it, and he did. The thing that caught my attention was when he said it sounded like a big lion roared at him. Well, my God, that's exactly what I heard. So the next day when I got in from work, he said he saw it, it broke this limb on a tree, and then this thing ran off. And I said, well, I heard something break. So when I got in from work the next day, I walked out there to the woods where I heard it. Sure enough, there was a tree standing there, and it was broke. And I'm about 6'3", and I walked up to it, and where it was broke, come up to about chest level. And the top of that tree was touching the ground, but it was still attached to the main part of that tree. And that was my first indication. I said, that must have been a Bigfoot. And I looked, and there was a big old log, and by that log, there was a pretty good sized turtle shell. Because there's a pretty good pond in that area where this thing was at. And that turtle shell was broke, and it was broke in half. It wasn't ripped apart, it was broke in half. I don't know how to explain it, but it was completely eaten out, and it was clean. And I said, that thing must, whatever it was, ate that turtle, left that turtle shell there. But after I got to thinking about it, where I live, there's a plantation pines planted behind my house, just south of my house. And every evening, I can watch deer come out of the woods, where this thing was in the woods, sitting in the woods, and it would come out in that area, and those deer would walk in front of my house and go in the woods south of my house, and every morning they would go back to those woods. And I just assumed this thing was waiting for those deer to come back into those woods, because that's usually where they go in the woods, is where I heard that sound. And it was a long time I didn't see any more deer. Well, I don't know, about 4 or 5 weeks later, it was on a Saturday morning, and it was about 8:30 in the morning. I was out in my yard, and I heard something scream in those woods that I had never heard before, and it was constant for probably at least 5 to 8 seconds, possibly 10 seconds. I was like, what in the world is that? I've never heard anything like that before. As soon as it stopped, the coyotes just went crazy, and the coyotes kept barking and howling and carrying on. And my brother lives across the road from me, and he walked up to my house, and he said, what in the world is wrong with the coyotes? And I said, I don't know. It sounded like something got into those coyotes. Might have killed one of them. I said, I don't know. I've never heard them cut up like that. Well, they finally quit. But I just, after watching the TV show, I connected it to that. I said that had to have been a Bigfoot. Well, some of the guys I ate breakfast with on Saturday morning, I was telling them about it, and they were laughing at me, trying to make fun of me, But 2 weeks later, one of the guys that I eat with, he came in there early that morning. He and I was sitting at the table, and he told me, so I want to tell you something. That he lives about 3 miles north of me in the same patch of woods. He said, I went out the other night. When I got back, he said, my dogs were cutting up barking in the yard. He said, I thought I heard something down in the woods make a sound. He said, well, I'm going to go in the house, get my flashlight, get in the truck, and go down and see what's going on. He said he went in the house, and he come back outside that flashlight. He heard this thing scream down in the woods. Didn't know what it was. He'd never heard anything like it before in his life. He said, I didn't go down there. He said, I went back in the house and locked the door. And he seems to think he may have heard the same thing that I heard.
Wow.
But I do have a friend that lives in Louisiana that actually sat in a deer stand one evening and watched it walk across his property. They own a lot of land, and they do a lot of deer hunting, and I asked him one day as we were talking, I said, you ever seen a Bigfoot as a joke? Because I just want to know if anybody ever seen one, He said, yes. He said, why'd you ask me that? And I said, well, I was just curious. I said, have you ever seen anything like that? And he said, well, I saw something. And he described it to me. And he said he actually called the Marion County Sheriff's Department and reported it. And they told him he was the third person to call it in. But he said this thing was jet black. He said when he first saw it, he was like, who is that on my property? And he said, I kept watching it. And he said, I realized it wasn't a man. And he told me, he said, Tracy, this thing must have been at least 9 foot tall. He said, I've never seen anything that big in my life. He said, I was actually scared to come down there at the deer stand. He said, I watched it walk all the way back on the backside of my field. And it went back into the woods. And he said, when I got back to the camp, I called the sheriff's office and reported it. And he seems to think he saw it. And then later on, I was telling some friends of mine in that community at a local store about my experience and about my friend's experience. There was a couple of young boys there, and they started laughing. And I told them, I said, I guess y'all think I'm lying. They said, no, we had a friend of ours that told us that he heard something down in the woods in that area you're talking about knocking on a tree. I said, "You're kidding?" He said, "No, I'm not. We thought he was joking." So, that was my experience, and we did have a major Bigfoot sighting here a couple of weeks ago, about 20 miles west of where I live. I didn't talk to the landowner that actually saw it, but I talked to a landowner who lived next door to him, and he said it scared the guy so bad that he went out and bush hogged 5 acres around his house and put up night lights, and he quit deer hunting. He said he wouldn't go back in the woods. But I think this landowner actually saw it. And I know the Discovery Channel came down and did some interviewing and talking to some people. But I didn't know that happened until after Discovery had already came and left, because I told him I would love to talk to him too, but I didn't get a chance to.
So you don't know any details on that one?
That's my experience, on this subject.
Pardon?
That's the experience that I had.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. That's for sure. So when you got hit with the sound when you were walking down your driveway, you said you froze, and you said you felt it. Now, there's some people that think that they have an ability similar to a lion to use infrasound, which can physically kind of hinder their prey. Do you feel like maybe that when that sound hit you, that it did something to you to drive like fear into you beyond what a normal animal can do?
Oh, hell yeah. The first thing that came to my mind was a lion. I've been to the zoo and I've seen shows on television, I've seen lions, but when that thing, it made a grunting noise at me like I had never heard before in my life, and it freaked me out. Now, I'm 59 years old, and I've hunted in those woods my entire life, and I have never heard anything like that, and I won't go in those woods now without a gun.
Yeah.
It was right on top of me when it did it. Like I said, when it turned and ran, I could actually feel its feet hitting the ground as it was running. It was so heavy.
My goodness.
And there's no way a 4-legged animal could have run through those woods. It was so thick.
Right.
You can't hardly walk through there, but this thing ran through the woods.
And when you heard
things as it was running.
Right. And you said that you I thought was the one of the most fascinating parts of that story was that you heard the vines stretching. Can you kind of describe like how thick, how big those vines were, and kind of give us a little bit of information on what it would take really to snap something like that?
Those vines are green-looking vines. They were about the size, probably a half-inch diameter, heavy vines. There's a lot of water oak trees in that area. I used to squirrel hunt in there. I was well familiar with the vines because I used to shake the vines, to run the squirrels out of trees. I used to train squirrel dogs back in there. But I just know, Brenton, those vines, you can't, a human being cannot pull and break those vines by hand. That's how stout they are.
All right.
Whatever, I could hear those vines stretching in them trees,
Right.
And that's what really threw me. I was like, well, I don't know what the hell that was, but whatever it was powerful, and it was big.
Right.
If I told my friends that, naturally they'd laugh and thought it was funny.
Right. Do you think if you hooked a 4-wheeler, like a ATV type 4-wheeler, to the vines that it stretched and broke, do you think that you would be able to take that 4-wheeler and break those vines?
Yeah, you could with a 4-wheeler, but you won't do it by hand. Not one man will not do it by hand.
Right, I agree. How big was the limb? How big was the tree that it broke? And was it a twist kind of snap, or was it just snap straight up?
It was just a snap. I heard it when it broke. It just snapped. That tree was probably at least an inch and a half in the area where it broke, and that tree was probably 10 foot tall. It was actually a little oak tree is what it was.
Right.
And like I said, the top was actually touching the ground, but it was still attached in the area where you broke it.
How big around was that?
On that show. Since my experience, I've been watching that show.
Right.
And they talked about it more than once about, when it breaks a tree or breaks a limb, what it's telling you is it wants you to go in that direction. Whatever which way the top of that tree is broke in, he wants you to go that way, but don't come toward him.
Right.
And that's exactly the way that thing was broke. It was broke in a way, if I was facing it, he was telling me to go to my right, but don't come toward him.
Wow. So the way it's leaning is the way he wants you to go.
Exactly. That's according to what I've seen on television. That's what they're trying to tell you. It's a signal for you to go in the direction that tree is broke in. And
right. Oh yeah.
He definitely ran in opposite direction. It was broke.
Yeah.
But,
I had Dr. Squatch on the show. He goes by Dr. Squatch. He's a chiropractor up in the Northeast. He's a legit doctor, chiropractic. And he was telling me about the way that those trees are broke and the way that they are leaned, the directions and even the leaner type things, they all are basically like road signs, saying you can go this way or don't go that way, and different things like that. And I was kind of wondering, how he pieced all that together, but over time it seems to be from the sightings that he does have and the activity and paying attention closely, and being a smart guy too. He's a doctor. I mean, he had to go to school and get a doctorate, and it's chiropractic. But still, you got to be fairly smart to get a doctorate in anything. But yeah, that's exactly what he says. Now the turtle shell. That is fascinating. When you told me how that turtle shell was broken, that is not the way that a human or an animal typically would get into a turtle shell.
Exactly.
So he took this thing in his hands and actually broke it across.
Yes.
My goodness.
Yes. It's like you would break an egg.
Right.
That's how he broke that turtle shell.
My goodness, that would take some strength right there, wouldn't it?
Oh, what are you talking about? That's what really, when I saw that, it shocked me. I was like, I've never seen a turtle shell broke like that. It took a powerful individual to do something like that. I don't think a man could do it.
Right.
But, and it was completely cleaned out. Whatever it was, ate everything inside the turtle shell.
Now, some of those Squatch stories that I've gathered over time, I know someone that had an encounter, and he said this Sasquatch was standing beside a tree that was 8 inches in diameter. He reached up with one hand and snapped that tree directly over with one hand. That is incredible.
Good Lord.
And it wasn't even a dead tree. It was a live tree. And he just kind of grabbed it and kind of twist and bent, and it was a twist snap. But to break an 8-inch tree, that's amazing. I mean, but the Squatch was about 9-10 foot tall, according to what he said. So you seen the turtle shell where this thing was sitting there, maybe on this log, watching the deer, the movements of the deer. You seen the turtle shell, and was there any other kind of little evidences of the thing sitting there eating and watching?
I didn't find any. Actually, when I saw the vines, I went in the viney area trying to see if I could find some hair or something,
Right.
But I wasn't able to find anything. But you have to understand now, it was like 2 months before I saw the television show after my experience. Right. And it had rained, and weather had changed. So the chances of finding hair were probably slim to none. But now, I think in my email I did tell you about my neighbor that owns, well, he's not my neighbor, lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but he owns property next to me.
Right.
And they got a deer camp, and he was telling me, and we're good friends, and I go up and visit him whenever he's up in Baton Rouge, just one weekend out of the month. So I went by to visit with him one day. I saw him there, and I stopped, and he asked me what had been going on, and I was just telling myself, nothing. We just got a Bigfoot in the area, and he laughed. He said, "Why you say that?" And I told him, about my experience. And I said, "I know you don't believe me, and I'm not going to call the guy's name, but I said, I know you're not going to believe me." He said, "No." He said, "That's not it at all." He said, "My son-in-law said that one walked out in front of him on the deer stand." He said the sun was coming up, and he saw this image on the far end of his deer stand. He said it looked to be at least 7 foot tall. We told him he saw a bear. He says, "I didn't see a bear." He swears up and down he saw a Bigfoot. And that's about half a mile from where I live, through the woods.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the woods that I had my experience is the woods that are between my house and his camp.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Sounds like you all got some serious activity going on in that area. It's amazing that these things actually do live in the woods near us. Isn't that incredible?
Well, Brenton, it's something else, and I didn't put it in the email when I sent it to you. And I have a cousin that lives behind me about, I don't know, probably close to a mile, which is woods between my house and his house. And I told him about my experience, and he swears. They claim that in some of these TV shows that there's, they see Bigfoot, they also see UFOs.
Right.
He swears that he saw a UFO between my house and his house one night when he got in.
Right.
And that's the same area where this Bigfoot was. But he actually got in his truck and left his home and drove down around the neighborhood to get to my house. And he said, before I got to your driveway, he said, my truck completely quit in the middle of the road. He said, the radio quit, the lights went out. He said, my truck went dead in the middle of that road.
Right.
And he said, after about 5 minutes, it cranked up like nothing ever happened.
Yeah, that's fairly common.
Yeah.
And I'm
well, I saw that on some of those shows as well.
Right.
But
and there's some people that laugh at that, but I really don't care if they laugh at it. They can if they want to. But I'm trying to get Scott Carpenter to come back on now that I've fixed my audio issues. Of course, we're recording the old way that I used to record, but I have other ways to record now so that I can, and I believe I can level the audio out on this interview now with the new stuff that I got. But anyway, Scott Carpenter was involved with the Melba Ketchum DNA studies and things like that. And, some of the theories that are out there, and according to the physical evidence that they gathered through this study, and Melba Ketchum is a legit scientist, doctor of veterinary medicine. I think she's a veterinary medicine person, and then she has a lab that does top DNA research in the country. And she ruined her career basically from messing around with finding Bigfoot. I think brought her some DNA and she sampled it and what have you. And it shocked her what they found. And it basically, in a nutshell, it turned out that the nuclear DNA, which is the father, was unknown species. Then the mitochondrial DNA, which is the mother, was a human woman. So there's some type of hybrid thing which fits when people talk about Genesis 6 from the Bible, that the sons of God, came unto the daughters of men. And so therefore you have this hybrid between angelic type beings and humanoid beings, and where we get the Nephilim, which happened to be, scripturally, was giants. So that's the theory. So the theory was that there was a type of giant. Now, I did some research because I study the scriptures in Hebrew and Greek and things like that to find out what words mean. Now, one of the words, Seder, which if you were to look Seder up, you would find a goat bottom half with a human top half with goat-like horns. But actually, in the Hebrew, the word means hairy. It's a hairy humanoid creature that lives in the wilderness, and the Bible actually says it calls and hollers or makes calls to its fellows out in the wilderness and things like that. And it basically lives out away from humans where people are not at, and it's a hairy humanoid creature. And I mean, does that not fit? So either the Seder or the Nephilim type stuff, I don't know how it all ties in together for sure, but there are things in the scriptures about that. So if you say that you've seen a UFO, there's also things in the scriptures about that. They were called chariots. And when you really break down these words in the Hebrew, they're compared sometimes to a millstone type thing that are round. that gives a description of what they look like. And but anyway, so it doesn't surprise me when I hear things about UFOs linked to that phenomenon, because those would be, and in my opinion, they would be angelic, whether fallen or not, and the offspring of those beings, that are out there in the woods, possibly. So anyway, that's very interesting. And when I have Scott back on, I think he's going to kind of talk a lot more in depth about those kind of things. And I sure can't wait to get that interview. But your story is very fascinating, and it adds to all the things that we have collected, and interesting. I think it's so interesting how the thing was sitting there watching the deer, and you kind of piece that together.
Yeah, I figured that's what he was doing. Whatever it was sitting there waiting for the deer to come through, because they usually go in front of my house right at daylight, going back into those woods.
Right.
And I just assumed, I said, he is sitting there waiting for those deer while he was there.
Right.
And
well, I appreciate you coming on, Tracy, and I'll be talking to you some more, and I'll let you know when I get this put together and everything, and I'll probably make a painting, an image for it that I usually do for each story, and I'll be in contact with you, man. And if you collect any more stories or hear any more stories, please do let me know.
I will certainly send you an email.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy, and I appreciate it. And be blessed, and keep my number. I sent you my number. Call me anytime you want to if you hear of any story or anything like that. And you just put the number to program in your phone if you want to, and keep my email and everything. And thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, YouTube land. That was a very interesting story, and I've got a few more stories. I might even put with this one for an hour-long show. This is about 30 minutes in now. We'll see you on the next video. God bless. Bye-bye.